Yes, on a medium-term portfolio, often are portfolios that have a specific purpose, and that purpose needs to be manifested often more than 2 years away, and up to 5 years away. So, great examples of medium-term portfolios are things like saving up for a wedding in the next few years, or let's say you want to buy a property in the next 5 years.
Hello and welcome to the Woke Finance Podcast, the podcast discussing all things finance and all things finance related. It's your boy Peter and I'm with my co-host, my bro Jax. How are you today?
Yes, Peter. I'm doing well, man. For our listeners that are outside of the UK, we've had some fantastic weather over the past few weeks. It's not summer yet, but it actually really feels like summer. It feels very much like summer, and I'm really, really enjoying this time. Hopefully, it lasts.
Hopefully, man. And on that note, a massive shout out to our listeners wherever you are. And if you are just listening to this podcast on a sunny ride home or wherever you're going, we just got a quick one in store for you. So sit back and relax and tune in. And now, the podcast topic or the episode today, what we're going to be talking about is three portfolios that we think everyone should have. That's everyone. So if you are listening, this is relevant to you. You may or may not have some of these portfolios, but let's get straight into it. Now, Jax, first and foremost, what on earth is a portfolio?
Yeah. So a portfolio in this context is essentially a collection of assets. So, when we speak about portfolio, one of the key ideologies we think about is diversification. So it's not just about having one asset, it's about having a good mixture of assets that come together as a team to fulfill a purpose. So one of the analogies I like to give is a portfolio is almost like a smoothie, right? If we were trying to create a smoothie, we have a whole bunch of different fruits and veg, hopefully more veg than fruit because of the sugar stuff. But you can have some veg and you can sweeten it up with different types of fruits, all together to just make one drink. And that's essentially what a portfolio is. It's a collection of different assets mixed together to achieve one goal.
And when someone is putting together this movie, what are some of, I mean, you gave one consideration about not having so many fruits because of the sugar content, but yeah, what are some of the considerations people need to think about when putting together a portfolio?
Yeah, so ultimately, you want to think about what the portfolio is trying to achieve. What is the purpose of that portfolio? And then you want to think about what things are going to go into the portfolio. So, the example I did give was the smoothie. So you think about, hey, what fruits and veg do I want to add into the portfolio and why? We talk about diversification in portfolios, right? So you want to make sure that the fruits and veg that you put in are not all the same type. So you don't want to just put all citrus fruit, for example, or you don't want to just put all um or veg, but you can mix and blend it how you want. You might want to add some apples, which is a fruit, right? Which is a bit sweet, but you might want to add some ginger, which is a bit more spicy, and turmeric and that kind of stuff. Or you might want to add some more juicy stuff like cucumbers that might not have a taste. But hey, when you combine all these fruits and veg together, essentially they come to help you achieve a goal. And so diversification is definitely a key consideration when you are building a portfolio. And of course, that portfolio has to achieve something. What is the
After,
purpose of the portfolio?
after this, I'm definitely making a smoothie. But I guess on that note, Jazz, I am gonna get straight to it in terms of actually asking what are the three portfolios that we think everyone should have. But before we do that, we've been given smoothie, fruit and veg examples. Can you just give maybe a few examples from an investment perspective and with names of types of businesses, sector, all of that jazz, what a portfolio could look like?
Yeah, so a portfolio can hold a wide range of different assets. As we've mentioned many times on the Woke Finance podcast, there are many different types of asset classes. There are mainly 4 or 5 different asset classes. We talk about equities, which are often called stocks and shares. These are essentially ownership in public businesses where you buy shares in a company, then you become a part owner. By being a part owner, if the company does well, the share price can go up. And also, some companies, in fact, many companies pay a dividend, which is a way to kind of return some money to the shareholder, sharing some profits. And then you've got things like bonds. Bonds that could be split into things like government bonds, where you borrow to the government, or you can borrow to corporates called corporate bonds as well, and these provide interest as well. So there's different asset classes. We know property is a very popular asset class. That's quite self-explanatory. And they've got a whole nother group called alternatives, and alternatives basically captures everything else. One of the asset classes under alternatives are things like commodities. You can even invest in things like infrastructure, which is a fascinating asset class to invest in as well. So all of these things are different things that can all go into one portfolio, and you can decide what mix you want the portfolio to hold, how much bonds or how much equities. You can decide to just choose one asset class, for example, right? So for example, it's like saying rather than choosing fruit and veg, you could just choose fruit if you wanted to. You could just choose veg if you wanted to. You can decide just to choose green veg, right? So you can just choose one asset class or one type of asset within the asset class. An example is, for example, even within equities, you can decide that you're only going to focus on large cap equities, which are big
Mm,
companies over a certain market cap, certain size. So this is why I like this movie example, because it really
mm.
highlights that there's so many ways to do it. It just really depends on what you are trying to achieve with that portfolio.
I love that. I love that. I love that, man. And as I promised our listeners, we're gonna get straight into the question on what are the three portfolios everyone should have. But you know, we like to just create a bit of tension there, Jack. So what I am gonna do is just give a shout out to where we're getting listeners from right now. And today, the city we are giving a shout out to is Cairo, capital and largest city of Egypt.
Yes, I know Cairo. I've never been to Egypt. I think my missus has, but I've never been to Egypt. And I do know, I actually learned this the other day that that's the actual capital. So it's interesting. Welcome to the Woke Finance podcast. You are here with myself, Jax, and the co-host Peter. And on this podcast, we talk about all things finance and all things finance related. If you want to know more about what we do, because we do more than podcasting, head over to www.wokefinance.co.uk. That's www.wokefinance.co.uk. And if you want to engage with us on socials, we are on TikTok, we are on Instagram, and we are also on LinkedIn. So if you search for Woke Finance, you'll be sure to find us. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the episode. I hope you are enjoying and gaining tons of value.
Love it, love it, love it. Massive shout out to our listeners over there. 42 degrees it is in Egypt. Gosh, 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 they are enjoying life. I'm sure they're used to it, but they definitely must be enjoying life over there. But no, massive shout out to our listeners over there as well and all over the world. We appreciate you and we see you. Now, Jax, for our listeners over in Egypt and wherever they are, China, Pakistan, the US, here in the UK. What are the three portfolios that everyone should have?
Yeah. So the three portfolios that everybody should have is a short-term portfolio, a medium-term portfolio, and a long-term portfolio. These are the three assets that everybody should have or aspire to build.
I know you're not just gonna leave it like that, Jack. So let's break it down.
Yeah, so as I said earlier, when you are building a portfolio, it is there to help you to meet your goals. That's what a portfolio should be for. It's there to you buy the different assets, but the assets there are there to help you achieve a goal. And whenever you are investing, we've said this many times on the Woke Finance podcast, whenever you are investing and managing money, what you are trying to achieve is an objective. You're also trying to achieve the objective with an understanding of the level of risk you are able and willing to take. And thirdly, you want to make sure you consider the time frame for which you are investing for, or the time frame for which you want that investment case to manifest. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about a short term, a medium term, and a long term portfolio. The short-term portfolio is there often to serve as liquidity.
Mm,
What do I mean by liquidity? We mean it's a short-term portfolio of very low risk assets. And this portfolio is purely there to operate as a reserve, right? So it's a bit different from an emergency fund. but it is a reserve. It's money that you use or you invest in this portfolio so that you use that money within 0 to 18 months. If you have 0 to 18 months before you need the money to do something, you create this short-term portfolio. Another term that people tend to use is dry powder. That's another
Mm.
terminology that people use. Dry powder, which is this is a short-term, low-risk portfolio that you can call upon should some sort of opportunity present itself, maybe in the real world or even within the financial markets. This is the portfolio that you draw from to take
Mm.
advantage of any short-term opportunities.
I like that. Because I guess obviously if you don't have that, then you might end up drawing from money that you're saving for the further future, or drawing from money that you don't have. So
Yes.
and I like that bit where you said, it could be used for short-term liabilities or protect, whether that's in the markets or in the real world as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Look, when I speak about a long-term portfolio, for example, you would realize that actually the risk profiles of these portfolios are different. And
Mm.
risk here is measured in volatility, right? So the long-term portfolio can invest in assets that are a bit more volatile. The issue with that is if you don't invest properly in a short-term portfolio and you invest in volatile assets and you think that's a short-term portfolio, you may be forced to sell your assets in an inopportune time. What do I mean by
Mm.
that? It means you may be forced to draw from a volatile portfolio at a time where asset prices are depressed. And that's what you don't want to do. That is a huge risk for your money. And so the short-term portfolio is there to serve as a very low risk, low volatility asset that can be called upon that you can sell at any moment without having to capitalize on a loss.
That's so interesting because I think when you are putting money aside for the short term liabilities or cost or whatever it is, if you are putting in something very volatile, generally life does just tend to happen, right? There's always say, I don't know, a recession scare which crashes the market for a bit or something like that, and then people might be forced. But as you said, the downside is that you may be forced to sell way before, much more prematurely, and I think sometimes I've heard people where they talk about those experiences and it puts them off investing completely.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. And actually, the opposite of that is, if you've listened to myself and Peter and you've learned about the short-term portfolio, that is exciting times when we are going through recessions rather than
Mm-hmm.
actually experiencing having to sell in an inopportune time. You've got your war chest, you've got your
Mm.
dry powder to take full advantage of the depressed asset prices, whether that be the financial markets or in the real world, or where you want to buy things like real estate and businesses as well.
Before we go into the medium term, is there science to short term portfolios in terms of how much of our money should be going, or is it really just about what fits into your plans or objectives, etc.?
That's a great question, Peter. And there is somewhat of a science and also an art to this game. So remember, people will often have an emergency fund anyway, right? They should anyway. There should be
Hmm.
3 to 6 months worth of an emergency fund stacked somewhere in a very low risk portfolio, or no, well, let's not call it a portfolio, just cash, or savings account or other financial products like premium bonds or cash ISA, for example, here in the UK. So that's an emergency fund. The short-term portfolio is a portfolio that goes a bit beyond that. So it can focus on other things like money market funds. And so how you decide how much you're going to go in there is a bit more subjective, right? So if your emergency fund is only 3 months worth of your expenses, then your short-term portfolio probably needs to be a bit higher.
Mm.
So you can consider that. But one of the real key considerations that makes this more of a science as well is it also depends on what's happening with the macroeconomic environment. So if, for example, we're now experiencing a situation where interest rates are much higher than they ever have been, right? We call it a risk-free rate that you can earn on your money, then you then probably want to decide to put a bit more money into the short-term portfolio because now you're compensated better, right? You get more money for your buck by actually putting it in a very low risk or basically no risk portfolio, in things like money market funds in your short-term portfolio. So that's kind of like the science behind how much you go in there, but it really is subjective. It really comes down to how you want to play your overall portfolio, mixing both your short term, medium term, and long term portfolio.
No, it makes absolutely lots of sense. Okay, so you mentioned the short term, and what about medium term?
Yes, on a medium-term portfolio, often are portfolios that have a specific purpose, and that purpose needs to be manifested often more than 2 years away, and up to 5 years away. So, great examples of medium-term portfolios are things like saving up for a wedding in the next few years, or let's say you want to buy a property in the next 5 years, or you want to just create a portfolio that you could draw upon within the next 5 years, even though you don't really know what you're going to use it for.
Mm,
Essentially, it's just a portfolio that, I call mine the lifetime portfolio, or not
mm,
lifetime, sorry, the lifestyle portfolio, which means, hey, if, for example, at some point I want to buy a car, that is the portfolio I would draw from, for example,
mm,
right? Or let's say I lost my job, then this portfolio in combination of the short-term portfolio can serve as my safety net, and I can draw from those portfolios until I find myself back on my feet. So that is what the medium-term portfolio is. It's purely there as a portfolio that you can invest in more riskier assets, but you still don't go all guns blazing, right? So you still don't invest in things like that are so volatile because again, we only have 5 years or even sometimes up to 3 years before we may want to draw from this portfolio. So this portfolio, probably you want to be a bit more balanced. You still want to hold a well-diversified portfolio of multi-asset assets within the portfolio.
love it. That makes perfect sense. Okay, and then let's close on the final one, which is the long term like portfolio. What can this look like? And with some maybe some examples.
Yeah, the long-term portfolio is truly when investing really does its thing. Here we're talking about investing in assets that are a bit more volatile, but hey, the name of the game when it comes to investing is that higher the risk, the higher the reward. The higher the risk, the higher the potential return. So essentially, this portfolio is a portfolio that we're building, and often the long-term portfolio is really often there for the average person to help them to retire comfortably with some dignity. That is often what the long-term portfolio is. And the time frame from the long-term portfolio is 10 years plus. But ideally, you even want to go to 20 years, 30 years, and hopefully even into perpetuity. So that is what a long-term portfolio is. It is there to grow over the long term. The biggest risk for our money over the long term is inflation. Inflation is the
Mm,
biggest risk for our money long term. And the long-term portfolio's main arch nemesis is in beef with inflation. The
mm.
long-term portfolio is purely there to knock out inflation and to provide returns so that we can also grow our money, preserve the value of our money, and retire with some level of dignity.
Love this, love this, love this. Now, for the listener that's probably just tuning into this, Jackson saying, "Yep, I need to make sure I've got money in all of well, I've got those three different portfolios, and there one is thinking, okay, so I've got money in my long-term portfolio, I've got stuff in my medium. I don't know about short-term, but is there a percentage split or do I just need to make sure I've got all these three set up essentially? Like, how does what's your encouragement to the individual that perhaps doesn't have all three of these portfolios?
That's a great question. Look, there will always be a level of subjectivity in all of this.
Hmm.
But I think what's really key is to understand who you are and what situation you are, because personal finance, like we always say, is personal. But look, if you are, for example, employed, chances are you are already part of your company's pension scheme. If you've opted out, we can't tell you what to do, but yeah, you might want to consider going back in. So it could very well be that your long-term portfolio could be already somewhat be captured by some sort of auto enrollment pension scheme. So in my opinion, Peter, I think you should have at least 10% of your income going towards your long-term portfolio.
Mm.
That's what I would say. However, the short term is always the most important because we're here right now and things can happen right now. So for me, I think the first thing people do, even before they start thinking about the short term, medium term, long term portfolio, is to really get their emergency funds sorted. Once the emergency fund is sorted, in my opinion, and whilst you have sorted out your emergency fund, you've also built other financial foundations such as life insurance or things like income protection, which we will do an episode on when we talk about insurance policies. Once you've got that sorted and you've protected your financial your current financial self, and you're taking care of your long term by at least getting that tax relief on your pensions, then it really comes down up to you as to how you then want to build the other short-term, medium-term, and long-term portfolios. It becomes very much more subjective. But I would say make sure you take care of the short end, take care of the long end, and everything in the middle is for all fun and games.
That's I was just about to say that's where it gets fun when you take care of the immediate short end, i.e. your emergency fund, and then the longer term end as well, man. The middle bit is yeah, as you said, subjective. So no, I love that. I love that. I really do. And hopefully that's been fairly useful encouragement for our listeners as well. It's so important getting that foundation in place and then sorting everything else out after. So hopefully it's been good for our listeners to tune in. And remember, these are literally the three portfolios we feel everyone should have. Jax, any final words before I let you go?
So I think this has been a great episode. I never knew much about having these three episodes when I first started my financial journey and my investment journey. It has come up over time, and as someone who has worked in the industry of asset management, investment management for a while, I have firsthand seen why these portfolios are important and why many institutions and private clients and stuff like that actually do have these portfolios. So take it from me, they work and they're there for a reason.
That's it. That's it. And your future self will definitely be thanking you. Thanking you very much. But now, Jax, man, thank you very much. Always a pleasure. Always good to chop it up for our listeners. Thank you. If this has been of any use or value, whatever platform you're listening to this on, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe. And if you've never commented on any of our episodes, why don't you do that? It'll help us out a lot. And feel free to share it with friends, family, and all of that good stuff. Remember all.
Hey.
Stay woke.